Thank you. I rise today to speak on the Gambling Legislation Amendment Bill 2023. The government announced on the 16th of July a series of gaming reforms, including mandatory closure periods between 4 a.m. and 10 a.m, statewide mandatory pre-commitment and carded play, a reduction in load-up limits on gaming machines from $1,000 to $100, and reduced spin rates on gaming machines. Now, to quote the Minister's second reading speech, on the 16th of July 2023, the former Premier and I announced Australia's most significant package of gambling reforms. Now, understandably, this announcement caught the industry off guard because less than 12 months earlier, clubs had re-signed with the state government for an agreement of an additional 20 years. So it had been less than 12 months since the election when no reforms were cited, and in a letter last September, the Victorian Gaming Minister, Melissa Horne, assured clubs the government changes were limited to the casino. But what we're seeing under this government is it doesn't matter if you sign a contract and enter an agreement with the state government, contracts don't always mean much. We've seen that with the Commonwealth Games that were cancelled. And in this case, the goalposts have changed. And I've spoken before in this chamber about the harm that gambling can cause. Gambling can become an addiction. It can snowball from issues such as broken relationships, poor health, financial pressures and social isolation. And just this week, we met with the Financial Counselling Service that talked about some of the challenges of helping people who have got themselves into a difficult situation and significant amounts of debt because of gambling. So there is no doubt that gambling harm is a problem in our community, and there is no doubt that electronic gaming machines are a part of that harm. And Dr. Matthew Bark just spoke before about the impact of poker machines and $1.38 billion received each year in revenue from poker machines that contributes to the state government coffers. But it was actually a desperate and broke Labor government that introduced pokies, and you'll recall Joan Kerner on the front of the Herald Sun putting a coin into the slot, and Wendy Lovell may recall that. She's been in politics a lot longer than I have. But there is a serious problem with people addicted to poker machines who are losing lots of money, who are harming themselves, harming their families and harming their friends by spending too much money, often money they do not have, on gambling machines. And I support any efforts to address the level of problem gambling in Victoria. Australians have the highest rates of gambling losses per adult in the world, with a loss of $1,277 per year on gambling for the average Australian. 1 in 5 Victorians who gamble may experience harm from gambling, and Victorians lost $2.2 billion at the pokies in the 21-22 financial year, and the heaviest pokey losses occurred in the most disadvantaged areas. Now, we've got to remember that gambling harm does not only occur at the pokies, it can also occur at the races, the dogs, the trots and online. And in 2011, it was a coalition government that set up the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation, which is effectively being wound up by this government and rolled into the Victorian Gambling and Casino Control Commission. But we will not oppose these reforms. We have circulated an amendment. But as I mentioned, these changes have come out of the blue, and there are a lot of questions that need to be answered to assist the industry. The government has effectively entered into a contract with pubs and clubs for the provision of gaming licences, and about a year later has announced significant reforms that could have quite genuine impacts on their revenue, on the value of those licences, and do expose the state to a potential sovereign risk issue. Now, I've spoken with people from Community Clubs Victoria, the RSL and Bendigo Stadium, and all have raised concerns about the impact of these proposed changes. Dennis Bice, the CEO of the Bendigo Stadium, gave correspondence, and the club commenced operating gaming machines in 1984, and they re-signed for 20 years with the state government last year. And in a letter to the Minister, I'll quote, it says, "With the recent announcements by the Premier, the club will have to reassess all capital expenditure and any expansion plans, as well as offering new employment opportunities to staff." It goes on to state, It is difficult to understand why your government would change the status quo shortly after clubs have re-signed an entitlement contract with government that provides for no recourse to exit gaming and appears to be materially unfair and unjust in the context of the recent announced changes. Our club's not-for-profit objective is clear: to support our members with facilities, services and in turn support our local community. We are desperately concerned by the potential detrimental financial impact of the government's gaming reforms and can report that if our revenue is impacted by a reduction of greater than 20%, we'll be facing the financial cliff and the future of our club placed in jeopardy. Now, once again, we are seeing policy on the run. Government making an announcement without first doing their homework and without proper consultation. In fact, they asked for input after they'd already made the announcement. But I will note some of their concerns. Now, certainly they're not worried about the reduced operating hours, although it's certainly worth noting that reduced hours will apply to everyone except Crown Casino, which is extraordinary given Crown's track record. A Royal Commission identified disgraceful behaviour, money laundering and criminal activity within Crown Melbourne Casino. So lots of questions remain unanswered about how these changes will operate, who will administer it and who will fund the cost of compliance. The carded play changes is something that they raised. The industry is not sure how it'll operate. It'll be one card per venue or one card across multiple venues. They're not sure about the information that needs to be collected for casual players, and they're concerned that people are unlikely to go to the effort of recording all that information. And also software upgrades that would be needed for the machines, how that's going to work. And from the community club's perspective, I guess they're looking at costs going up and they're very concerned about the impacts on their bottom line. I know Bendigo Stadium has 15,000 people who come through every week and they return the funds that they receive to the local community. So very strong basketball programs there, netball programs there, and they do a lot of great work in the local community. I also met with Bendigo RSL. They operate as a registered charity, and it was interesting to see their correspondence that they wrote, and they talk about what they're involved in. And I quote, it says, "The RSLs are unique in that we operate as a registered charity. Our not-for-profit objective is clear, and that we support our veterans and members with facilities, wellbeing and welfare services, and in turn support our local community. We support many local clubs by helping them purchase new uniforms, sporting equipment and to get to tournaments. Recently, the RSL network came together to help finance the Victorian Paralympic football team fly to Perth to compete in the National Para-Football Championships." They go on to say, "An example of what we do, apart from paying the bills of struggling veterans through rental assistance, house and car repairs, veterans' children's school fees, emergency accommodation, food, fuel, etc., is the emergency help we can provide. In amongst the multiple veterans in despair within the Greater Bendigo region, or feeding a whole community as part of the Rochester floods Victoria experienced 12 months ago, we recently helped one veteran who had been living rough for 3 months out in the bush. Whilst putting this veteran in a motel for 3 weeks so they could dry out, get a hot shower, eat some hot food, get some clothes, etc., we worked behind the scenes to get them some longer-term accommodation paid for through the funds we earn as a licensed club." Now, it is concerning that they also state in their letter, without amendments to the proposed changes, the assistance we give our veterans will be put at risk in the future. If the sub-branch cannot afford to do this, these veterans fall through the cracks, continue to live on the streets and potentially take their own lives. So this change that we're discussing today raises the question of what measures the Victorian Government will implement to support RSL and community clubs like the Bendigo Stadium with these reform transitions, considering the unique circumstances of being registered charities and the impact on the delivery of essential veteran and family support. Now, I am concerned that these services may become too dependent on gambling revenue to deliver these services, and they are important community activities, and with the potential loss of revenue, ones that I hope the government will continue to support. So, as I said, I support measures to minimise the harm of gambling, and we do not oppose this legislation, but we have put forward an amendment that has been circulated. But it's important for this government to listen to the concerns raised by industry, from hotels, RSLs and community clubs, and consider the impact of these changes prior to the introduction next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Terpstra.